thank you, Tara. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to share about Stearns Farm and our cookbook. This is a collaborative effort, although I am the author and editor, as Tara said. So many people contributed to this book. I joined Stearns Farm in 2015 as the newsletter editor. I was writing the weekly news for our members. And so I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about Stearns Farm and our mission and how the cookbook came about. And then I'll turn it over to Daphne, and she'll share some recipes and give you some tips for cooking with seasonal produce throughout the year. I want to mention also that Daphne contributed several recipes to the book. So she's been a Stearns Farm member for longer than I have, I believe. Stearns Farm was one of the first CSAs in the United States. If you are not familiar with what CSAs are, the letters stand for Community Supported Agriculture. And this is a model of farming that provides a set amount of revenue for farmers every year by selling memberships or subscriptions to to shareholders who get a share of whatever the farm produces. It was established in 1990 by Penelope Turton. She was a friend of Margaret Welch, who lived in the Nixon house right across Edmonds Road from the farm. Margaret was the member of a wealthy Boston family, and she owned the farmland and many, many acres besides, which she donated to the Sudbury Valley trustees in the 1970s. If you like to hike, there's a trail into the Bating Brook Welch Reservation at the eastern edge of the farm, and this connects to the Bay Circuit Trail and the miles and miles of trails in Callahan State Park. So if you have not discovered that area and you enjoy hiking in the outdoors, I highly recommend it. Penelope Turton was actually one of a line of farmers who have worked this land for about 3 centuries. The Stearns Farm is part of Framingham's long history. The English settler Timothy Stearns, after whom Stearns Farm is named, purchased a large tract of land on Edmonds Road in around 1723, and he built his house where we have our sheds now. And we can actually trace the colonist settlement of Stearns Farm land even further back. And if you're interested in pursuing this, Framingham History Center has lots of information on the history of this area and land holdings. There are some records, for example, that Thomas Danforth, who was granted the thousands of acres known as Danforth Farm by the colonial government, and that became the town of Framingham. He leased land to Samuel Winch and Thomas Frost in 1693, and that included the site where Stearns Farms is now, 30 years before Timothy Stearns entered the picture. Stearns' grandson was a Revolutionary War captain named Thomas Nixon, and he built the Nixon House in 1787. And the land stayed in the family until Margaret Welch bought it in the early 1900s. And Nixon House became Margaret's country retreat. She had a house in Boston. She was a socialite who was very well known and also an activist. Today, many of us who belong to Stearns Farm, think of it as a respite as well. You can go to the farm and any day, you can pause and engage your senses. You can sit down under our apple tree by the greenhouse or by Penelope's garden, which is our herb garden where we grow tea herbs. And you can feel the sun, and you can smell the herbs and the flowers and the soil, and you can watch for birds and listen to the insects and see the wildlife and look out over the fields. The photo behind me is a photo of Stearns' Pick Your Own Flower Garden. I took it last year. It looks different this year. It looks different every year depending on which flowers the farmers plant and how they rotate them. But it's just a gorgeous spot. And just last week, our farmers carried 6 baby snapping turtles that hatched on the farm to a nearby brook. So there's a lot of nurturing of life happening around the farm, not only in our fields, growing the food that nourishes us. Stearns Farm serves about 200 families in the greater Framingham area. We provide vegetables, berries, herbs, and flowers. We partner with Autumn Hills Orchard in Groton every fall, so members can purchase an optional fruit share and get fresh picked apples and peaches and pears, and we got some plums last week also. We sell maple syrup from Harm's Family Farm in Brookfield, and some years we've been able to sell honey from our beehives, which are managed by Arthur's Apiary, beekeeping service that's also based in Framingham. Stearns Farm is a nonprofit, and our mission includes education, including programs like these. We pay fair wages for farmers. We support food security for our community through grants of shares to local residents in need. And we promote land stewardship. In everything we do, we want to connect people to the land where their food is grown and help them understand how organic practices and sustainable agriculture help keep the land healthy and thriving. I also want to thank Tara and the team at Framingham Public Library for this opportunity to tell you all about the farm and the cookbook. We published it about a year ago. Over the years, as a sharer at Stearns Farm, I've been able to meet a lot of our sharers during my weekly pickups and events. And I learned how generous they were with ideas about how to cook with our beautiful, bountiful produce. One of the things that happens when you join a CSA is, you start to get vegetables that you aren't used to eating, because what we grow is seasonal and it's not necessarily the stuff that you are used to picking up at the supermarket. For example, early on, I had lots of questions about kohlrabi, and I don't have a kohlrabi to show you, but it's a bulb that is crunchy and it tastes a little like cabbage, and it's a mystery to a lot of people. It certainly was to me, and until I got some advice from one of the folks that I met while picking up my vegetables, and that recipe's in the cookbook actually. Also, sometimes you will get a bumper crop of something, and well, what do you do when you get 3 pounds of zucchini for the 3rd week in a row, which happened to us earlier this summer? There's only so much zucchini bread you can fit in the freezer. So Daphne, fortunately, has a solution for this that you'll hear about shortly. We decided that these were all really good reasons to publish a cookbook, so that our members and our farmers could share their recipes and their cooking wisdom. And Tara showed you a copy of the book. Hopefully you saw our beautiful cover that was taken by, photo was taken by Framingham High School graduate Nadia Peschke. The book has more than 35 recipes from our members and farmers and our partners, and these are all dishes that they've cooked and enjoyed with their families. We've also included some tips on preserving vegetables and herbs and fruit that people might find in their shares or at farmers markets. The book isn't just for people who have a Stearns Farm share. It's really, it's a really good book for anybody who lives in New England and wants ideas for eating more local produce. And I even have some friends who live many states away who have the book and have found it useful. Local residents also contributed really beautiful pictures and that are inspiring, and those are included throughout the book. And in fact, everyone who worked on this book is either a Stearns Farm member or lives in our service area. So I like to say the book is as local as our produce. If you'd like to buy it, and of course we hope you do, there will be some information on a slide that I'll post at the end and that Tara will put in the chat. But briefly, the book is sold exclusively at the farm. It's not available in stores or on the big online sites. If you come by the farm, which is at 862 Edmonds Road, in North Framingham when it's open on Tuesdays and Fridays through the end of October. You can pick up a copy in person. For the next week, we're also going to make it available online. So you can order it online until September 21st. And that's kind of a limited time offer because aside from the farmers, we're staffed by part-timers and volunteers. And, we don't have, somebody who's dedicated to fulfilling orders. And the book is $20 plus Massachusetts sales tax. And if you order online, we ship by US Media Mail. And all proceeds from the sales of the cookbook will benefit Stearns Farm and our nonprofit mission. And now I'd like to turn things over to Daphne so she can get to the recipes and tell you all about cooking with local foods.
Thank you, Elana. I'm really excited to be here tonight with all of you, representing Stearns Farm and highlighting this really wonderful cookbook. I just want to second what Elana said about the sense of solace you get being at the farm. We've been members for 16 years. And I don't think either of my kids actually remember a summer of their lives without Stearns Farm. So I'm really happy about that. Over 16 years, that's approximately 320 times going to the farm to pick up my produce. And in a 16-year span, you have a lot of different moods, a lot of different things happen. And many times I found myself sitting in the Adirondack chair, taking in the farm that Elana described. And, like she said, the trails to Callahan State Park and the trees and the birds and the tea garden and the children's garden. And then, behind me are the people in the pavilion having these wonderful conversations that you described, talking about recipes and sharing their ideas. 30 years ago, when Stearns Farm became a CSA, was also when I started my career as a plant-based chef. And I just am really, I'm actually really surprised when I reflect on how much has changed since then on the food landscape. In 1990, you could only buy organic food in a natural food store or at the rare farm that you could find. And as Elana said, Stearns Farm was the only CSA at that time in this region. I don't know about, just in this region is what I know. And in that decade, a lot of variety was introduced to the American diets. And we were eating a lot more food, and a lot of it was actually very healthy food, exotic fruits and vegetables, heirloom grains, but a lot of it was being imported from other countries. Starting in around the early 2000s, organic food sales really grew in this country, and it grew quite a bit each year. And the sale of organic food expanded beyond the health food store and into the supermarket. So there was then, at that point, there started to be more overlap as to where you could get organic food. And also in that decade, we started talking about the trip your food took from the farm to your table. And we started to think about this. We were eating all these wonderful foods that were flown a long distance, And then we also started thinking about the health benefits of eating more plants, and then especially eating more local plants. So those ideas really started going in between 2000, 2010. And I would say the last decade, they really took off. And now we find ourselves with the trendiest foods are these local organic plants. And I just find that really exciting. It's surprised me beyond my wildest dreams. I had not expected that to trend like that. But now when you eat in a fine restaurant, you're more likely to want to eat the food and want to pay a premium for the food if it's fresh and local and sourced from a farm and where it's sourced. The restaurant would tell you where it's sourced. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit of all that's changed. And also people are, like I said, eating more plants. So we know that it's good for the environment, it's good for our bodies, but what we'll be focusing on tonight is primarily how good it tastes. So this fresh, local, organic produce is just bursting with flavor. And we are going to make a bunch of dishes tonight that really are a great example of that. They're a great example of taking these humble ingredients and mixing them together with a deft hand and creating a finished product that's really an elevated dish, made with just these wonderful farm ingredients that you might be happy eating on their own, but when you mix them together, the result is amazing. So what we'll be doing tonight for the next half hour-ish is we will be having a conversational cooking class, which is a lot like what Elana and I both observe on the farm. All, people talking about recipes, inspiring you with their recipes and their ideas about how they use the produce. Lucky for us, the recipes we'll be using are very well written in our cookbook. So, so that we can describe them to you and give you the ideas, but if you get stuck, you have the solid recipes. And a lot of these recipes, what I really like about it is they're a good formula. So I like it that I wanted to make roasted tomato soup tonight because I love roasted tomato soup, but I didn't think there was a recipe in the cookbook. And then I looked through the cookbook and I saw that there was actually a roasted tomato sauce. So we're able to take that roasted tomato sauce and adapt it to actually make 3 dishes. So we're going to discuss those 3 dishes tonight. So pretty much anything I've wanted to make, I can look in here and I can see more or less a formula to make it. We will be making 4 soups tonight. And I decided to because we're not in person, we have the luxury of, we don't have to eat everything that actually is at the farm right now. We can talk about the season and what we eat throughout the 20-week season at Stearns Farm. So we'll be making a green soup, I'm short a soup, oh dear. Oh no, I only made 3 of the soups to demo. Okay, sorry. We have green soup, we will have a roasted tomato soup and a summer squash soup, as well as a winter squash soup. And what I realized was that actually we're at a very sweet spot at the farm right now, and we can make all of these soups with our bounty. That's not true all summer, but at this very moment when there's so much abundance at the farm, all of these things are actually available to us. So that's actually that wasn't my intention. I wanted you to see how you could adapt to every part of the summer, but all of these soups are now fresh and available. So we'll make these wonderful soups, and then we'll imagine that we have a crusty artisanal bread, and we'll make a carrot top chimichurri to dip our bread in, and a roasted tomato sauce extracted from our roasted tomato soup to also dip our bread in, maybe have with some hummus on the side, but we're not making hummus. And then anything but basil pesto, also to spread on our bread. And with these 3 dishes that we'll have with our artisanal bread that we'll have, theoretically, we'll also talk about how to make them into a full meal. So, how to use the chimichurri on your salmon, and obviously the pesto and with pasta, but in so many other ways as well. And then the roasted tomato dip, we'll talk about how close that is to the sauce recipe that we actually took all of the roasted tomato dishes from tonight, and how you can use this on pasta or stew your chicken in it or use it in any number of ways. So that's what we will be doing here tonight. And as Tara said, I'm going to go through each recipe, and then if you have a question, she'll let me know. So we have a chance to pause if there are any questions. One theme that I'm going to be focusing on with you this evening is the idea of not shopping for certain things. So if you have a recipe, like plate of onions, so I just want to show you, I have scallions, spring onions. I wanted you to see, it doesn't look very good, but actually that's an important part, and I'll talk to you about that in a bit. The regular yellow onions for storage, red onions, big and small, shallots, garlic scapes, leeks, scallions. So what I want to encourage you to think about, and we'll talk about it with each recipe, what we choose to use, is you don't necessarily need to go shopping for your onion or garlic the whole season at the farm. Pretty much all the 20 weeks, you'll be supplied with something that has that onion or garlic flavor. So if the very first week you want to make a recipe and it calls for onion and garlic, and all you get is scallion and garlic scapes, because that's very likely to be in your share early on, then by all means use garlic, garlic scapes and scallions. So we'll be talking about that as we go through the recipes. And the other thing, the other ingredient that's abundant at the farm all season, and sometimes a little bit thinner in stock, but always there in some capacity, are greens. So sautéing greens, you can be creative. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, let's get started. The first soup we'll be making tonight is listed in our book as a zucchini soup. And we actually are using a yellow summer squash tonight. And this soup can be made identically, and I'll talk about that also in a bit, with zucchini. But there's been a really lot of yellow summer squash, and I wanted to have a few different colors tonight, so I chose to make it with the yellow summer squash. This soup is wonderful because it really is, the flavor is really very nuanced. It really has depth of flavor, yet this soup has three main ingredients. And the three main ingredients are shallots, yellow summer squash, and old-fashioned rolled oats. We'll also use a splash of white wine, some extra virgin olive oil, salt, and pepper. But these are the main ingredients in the soup. So to make this soup, I took exactly what was in my share last week, and I diced 2 cups of shallots. I love shallots. To me, they're like a special occasion food. 30 years ago, when the food landscape was very different, the shallots that we got in this country were imported from France, and they were sold only in like your finest supermarkets in these little boxes. And there were like 2 shallots in the box, and they were very, very expensive. So if you wanted to make a recipe with 8 shallots, it would actually be very expensive, and then you'd have to bring home these little boxes and unpack it. And often the shallots were a little mushy and slightly rotted because they had flown from France, and most people weren't using shallots, so they sat in the produce department for a really long time. But now shallots, we got these beautiful shallots at the farm in our share 2 weeks ago, or last week, 1 week ago, and they're absolutely delicious. And a shallot is like a mix of garlic and onion, and it really adds like that extra layer of nourishing and complex flavor. So we're going to dice 1/2 cup of shallots. We're going to chop into just chunks our summer squash. And then we're going to set our oats aside. I use 2 generous handfuls. I believe in the recipe it says 1/3 cup, which is about 2 generous handfuls. And we are going to bring our soup pot. I happen to be storing other things in my soup for tonight, but we're going to bring our soup pot to heat. We're going to put it on the stove and put it on medium high and add 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. We'll wait till our oil is warm, when our hand is about 2 inches above the bottom, where we feel heat radiating from the bottom of the pan, and we'll throw in our shallots at that point. Alternatively, you can wait until the oil shimmers, and then add your shallots. I forgot what they were called. So you want to add the salt also at this point, and I'm going to see if this recipe calls for a specific quantity of salt. I sprinkle it with salt, and then I add my pepper at this point as well, and I saute it until the shallot begins to be translucent. And that means that you can just see through it a little. It's no longer solid in color, but it's a little bit see-through. Oh, there we go. I found my recipe. No, it says salt and pepper to taste. So we're going to talk about tasting. So you want your shallots to be nice and translucent. Then you'll put your summer squash in the pot, and you'll put your oats in the pot, and you'll put a splash, this is optional, but you put a splash of dry white wine in the pot. And the acid from this wine really complements the oil and the other ingredients, and it adds a bit of an umami flavor. I like to have a little bit of acid to balance most soups that I make. So I really like, you don't taste the wine, but it really adds a lot of nuance. And when you're making a soup or any dish, your goal is really to layer the flavors so that they come together in harmony. So this is where we have our shallots, our salt and our pepper in our olive oil. And we have our summer squash, our oats, our splash of wine. And then we cover it with water. The water should be about 1/4 of an inch above the vegetables. We cover it, we bring it to a boil, we turn it down to a simmer, and we simmer it for approximately 30 minutes until it's creamy. The vegetables can cream when you mash them with a fork. They're soft. And then we remove it from the heat, take the lid off, and let the steam escape for approximately 10 minutes. This is something we will be doing with all of our soups. We want to before we blend our soups, and we're making all creamy soups tonight, we want to let the steam escape so that when we pour it into our blender, we don't get, really hot, steamy vegetables coming up and splashing us. And also when we blend it and the steam escapes from the vegetables, that we don't hurt ourselves. So we have this beautiful soup with these simple ingredients. We can add a little bit more salt and pepper, and then we blend it. You want to blend it in a liquid blender, which is a tall blender. If you don't have a liquid blender, you can use an immersion blender. If you don't have an immersion blender, you can use a potato masher. The liquid blender is the best choice because it will make a truly creamy soup with no texture or no, little bits of texture. This soup is a good candidate for the immersion blender because it does have very creamy ingredients. And the potato masher actually will make a lovely soup, but it will not be a creamy soup. It will have a creamy elements, but it will obviously be a textured soup. But you should never feel limited by your tools. You should use whatever you have in the house, and you never need a special tool if you don't have it. And we end up with this really exceptional soup. I'm going to show you a soup with a garlic chive flower in it. Can you see that? Actually, I'm going to adjust this. The soup makes a beautiful yellow color. Can you see that okay? And I took a bunch of edible flowers from the farm today. All of these flowers are edible. So I got these from the farm, and I'm choosing to garnish my soup with it because I always choose to garnish special occasion foods if I'm having company or I'm trying to elevate a meal. And this soup, even though the ingredients are very simple, is a very special soup. If you want to go crazy and completely wow your company or your family or yourself, you can make the exact same soup with zucchini, with a green skinned zucchini. So these are all in the summer squash family. As I can't remember if I said that already, but the green skinned zucchini, you can make identical soup next to your yellow skinned summer squash and pour them into the bowl at the same time and end up with this absolutely gorgeous two-tone soup. You can make it into a yin and yang symbol or wisp it out with a fork or just leave it. And it makes it even more enjoyable because it's so pleasant to look at. So that is pretty much that recipe. Oh, this can be eaten hot or cold, and it can be frozen. The oats add this really nice creamy texture. You do not know there are oats in it. And for seasoning the soup, I just want to pause to suggest that this is a really important step. You want to season your food so that all the flavors come together, they marry, they come together in harmony. So that you don't want to taste the soup and say, oh, I taste shallot or I taste oats or anything. You want to taste the soup and say, ah. So that really is the goal. So I recommend that you practice seasoning if you don't feel like you're already good at it. And you add salt and taste it. This is a clean, usually clean part of your hand. So in a class, I'll drip it on your wrist and you taste it, see what it tastes like, add a little more salt. And just try to, you don't want to over salt, but you just want to get it just right so the flavors have harmony. And I just want to show you how this clings to the spoon, how nice that creaminess is with that little bit of oats added. Now I'm done with that recipe. Are there any questions?
No, there are no questions yet, although Daphne, I actually have a question for you. You mentioned editable flours, and I'm really curious, are those used primarily for aesthetic reasons, or do they actually add flavor?
Oh, that's a good question. I have to be honest, I don't often eat them myself because they're usually a little spicy. My husband loves them. So you can actually, I mean, usually I think, no, you can use them either way. You can put them in a salad. You don't usually cook with them because they're so beautiful and bright that you're not looking to, you want them to pop in whatever dish you use them in. So I will tell you, I've only tasted the nasturtium, and I don't even, and these are nice. These are really spicy. These are the garlic chive flowers. So they can be used in cooking. They would be beautiful in your salad, but they also wilt really easily. So they're not the kind of thing that you want to like, actually the garlic chive flowers are pretty hardy, but all the others do wilt pretty easily. So you might notice I picked them and put them right in water today at the farm. So you can absolutely eat them and they're for eating, but it's like a last minute thing. If you're going to be putting out, a bunch of salads and they're going to be sitting around, it's not your ideal ingredient.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Our next soup, and I'm starting in the middle of the season. So the way I saw the soups was greens in the beginning, summer squash, and tomatoes really at the same time, and the winter squash at the end. So I'm doing the two that are in the middle first. And our next soup is a roasted tomato soup. And this comes from our recipe in the book. I have to find it. I'm sorry. I think it's called Pomodoro sauce, I think. Everything Pomodoro sauce. I'll find it. Garden Abundance tomato sauce. I guess I got that wrong. There's another recipe for Pomodoro sauce. And her recipe is very similar to what we'll be doing. And basically what she says, I can't remember, I can't see who wrote this. Maybe this is Elana who wrote this. But basically you can plug in, there's a solid good recipe in the book, and it says you can plug things in. You can add, she calls for 3 cups of coarsely chopped mixed vegetables to be added to your 3 pounds of tomatoes. So really it's whatever you have on hand, which is what I love about the recipe, that you get the wonderful flavor of the roasted vegetables and you're using whatever is in abundance and fresh in your home. So I can't believe I didn't taste roasted tomatoes till maybe 3 years ago or something like that. But a roasted tomato soup, it has a lot of dimension, but it's a very different type of dimension than the summer squash soup. It has like this incredible depth. It's very, very rich. And it's like, it almost feels like it's coating you. It's like so nourishing and so good. We actually bought these bowls in my house because of that soup, because my husband said, we were having company, and I said, what do you want for dinner? And he said, I want a little bowl of roasted tomato soup. It's a really, really elegant gourmet dish that's very, very rustic to prepare. So really, you want to take a lot of tomatoes, or or actually however many you have in your share. Um, but I used 8 pounds of tomatoes to make the soup that I'm using, and that's what I had in my share that particular week. I had a lot of leeks on hand, so I chopped up leeks. So I chopped up all the tomatoes. I didn't worry about them being Roma tomatoes or paste tomatoes. I just used any tomato. I think I had 3 pounds of cherry tomatoes and 5 pounds of assorted, slicing tomatoes with maybe some paste tomatoes. Um, Once upon a time, there were a lot more rules to cooking. Oh, you should only use paste tomatoes for cooking, and and then the beefsteak tomatoes are for sandwiches and salads. But those rules are really not necessary. So these wonderful tomatoes release a lot of liquid. So actually, I find that the slicing tomatoes are really wonderful in a soup because they do add a lot of flavor and liquid. So in this soup, we have 8 pounds of tomatoes. We have 2 leeks cut up. I'm trying to remember what I put in my actual soup that I'm serving you. We have fennel, and fennel is happens to be exceptional in tomato soup. And I use just the bulb, so I save the top. Fennel tastes a lot like licorice. It's a real delicacy. It's really a beautiful vegetable. It's wonderful roasted. It's wonderful raw. It's wonderful added to soup. It smells good. It tastes good. So anyway, I use the bottom of the fennel, and I use celery, not too much. Our celery at the farm this year, I don't actually have any left, but it was quite delicious with thin green stalks and big leafy greens that you could use to saute or in a soup. I used it in my green soup tonight. Um, so we have leeks, tomatoes, fennel, garlic, and a lot of extra virgin olive oil. And that's pretty much it. Salt and pepper, lots of fresh basil. I did add fresh basil, and actually I did add a little bit of parsley also to add that dimension of flavor. With the basil or any herb that I add to this particular soup, I try to tuck it underneath the tomatoes so that it doesn't burn when you roast it. So this is what it looks like. Every time I make, and this is not even my most beautiful, but every time I make a roasted tomato ensemble, I take a picture because I'm always so stunned by how beautiful it looks before it goes in the oven. And in this, I'll roast this tonight when we're done. But I also use peppers in this one because that's what I have on hand. So again, you can plug in whatever you have on hand. And if you're making a soup, you have to be incredibly generous, more generous than you can possibly imagine with the extra virgin olive oil. And the original recipe I saw for the soup, way back when I started making it a few years ago, was it called for 3 cups of extra virgin olive oil for 9 pounds of tomatoes. I cannot bring myself to use that much, so I would say I use more like a cup and a half. And the recipe in the book calls for, this is a smaller recipe, but I chose to use everything in my share that week. So that's why I made it with 8 pounds. It calls for 3 pounds of tomatoes, any variety. There are no rules. 3 cups of vegetables, and she suggests onion, zucchini, carrots, and eggplant. 4 to 5 large garlic cloves, a bay leaf. That's totally fine, but you can also use dried basil, dried oregano. You don't want to forget to remove your bay leaf. Oh, here she says 3 tablespoons of fresh herbs, 3 teaspoons of dried herbs, salt, pepper, balsamic vinegar, and extra virgin olive oil. So that is the one thing I really want to encourage you. When you're making a soup, you have to be quite generous with the extra virgin olive oil. That's really going to, this soup is not, it's not going to make you feel like it's so rich, but it's going to make you feel like it's so satisfying and so special. So I would recommend that if you're using, 8 to 10 pounds of tomatoes, that you use at least a cup and a half of extra virgin olive oil. If you are making a sauce, you have to use less. So what she does in her recipe is she just coats it like you would roasted vegetables. So she splashes a generous amount, but certainly not a cup and a half of extra virgin olive oil on the vegetables. And then she's able to blend it afterwards, and it's the correct consistency for a sauce. So we take our beautiful tray of vegetables and we put it in our preheated, I forgot to say to preheat, in your preheated 400-degree oven, and you cook it for about an hour. Your house will smell unbelievable. It will smell so good. This soup really, like, you just can't believe that you've made something that smells so good with such simple ingredients when you're cooking it. And you just stick it in the oven and roast it. And when everything looks cooked, maybe it's starting to brown a little bit and it's somewhat tender, you take it out and you let it sit as you did your summer squash soup. You let the steam escape. And then you blend your soup, again, in your liquid blender. If you find that it's too thick, and the soup is different every time you make it. And that's what she says in the recipe. The sauce is different every time you make it. You use different vegetables. The tomatoes are, don't release as much liquid that particular time. You use different tomatoes. You can add water while you're blending. So adding water is absolutely an option if it needs a little bit, to be thinned out a little bit. This soup is very, very rich in flavor, so the water will not dilute the flavor. So from this one formula of roasting our tomatoes, we end up with this dip. This dip I made for the first time last week because I had tomatoes on my counter and I didn't want them to go bad. And I was going to a friend's for dinner and I made some hummus and I made the chimichurri. And I thought, why don't I just put some of the roasted tomatoes in a bowl as well? And it pretty much was very similar to the tomato sauce. So they're almost identical. And I would suggest that this soup can be served hot or cold. It freezes very, very well. And I really recommend you try it. It has just such amazing, amazing flavor for such simple ingredients. So I hope I didn't forget any steps. I didn't add actually any, did she say vinegar in the recipe or wine? I forget. I chose not to add acid when I made it a balsamic vinegar. You can add a splash of balsamic vinegar. It will, again, balance out all that oil. So, it will just make the flavors really, really,
Still with us, Daphne?
Yeah, I was not with you for a moment. There was a bug on my screen and then I lost you. I went to push it away. Sorry. So
No problem. Actually, we did get a question about this one. The question is, do you roast the fennel with the tomatoes?
Oh yes, yep, I do. Roasted fennel is absolutely delicious. It's one of the most delicious roasted vegetables. And you can just stick it right in. If you want to use the green tops, some of them, you should just, chop them fine. And again, make sure they're mixed in well, maybe hidden a little bit with the basil.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us again what the temperature is that you roast it at?
Yeah, so I normally roast at 425 or 450, but this soup I cook at 400 because it does have a lot of liquid and there's a lot of fat in the pan. So it does smoke a lot in the oven. So I roasted, and the recipe also calls for 400 degrees.
Okay. And quick question, I'm sorry. I think you mentioned 8 to 10 pounds of tomatoes.
Yeah, okay. So I should have followed the recipe more, I'm sorry. But when I made this 2 weeks ago or a week ago in preparation for this, I used what I had that week, my bounty at the farm. And it was 8 pounds of tomatoes that week. When I was first introduced to roasted tomatoes, it was my friend's mom, Miriam, introduced me to this recipe, and she makes it with 10 to 20 pounds of tomatoes and freezes it for the winter. So, you know, if you have a farm share or you have a garden or you're going to the farmer's market, there is a point in the summer when there are so many tomatoes. And, you know, this 8 pound of tomatoes made a big pot of soup, not an excessively big pot of soup, you know, just like a regular pot of soup. And again, that's why a little bowl of soup goes a long way.
Okay, so we have one more question, and that is, so about how many servings can you expect?
That is a good question. So the recipe in the book for our 3 pounds of tomatoes, I'm going to see if it says how many servings. I would say 15 servings, maybe, from what I'm describing from the the one that I just did without following the recipe. This one says it makes about a quart. So it does make, remember, there's not the, this is a sauce. I'm sorry. I forgot it was a sauce. So if you wanted to make that into a soup, you might add almost as much water. So if you were pureeing the Garden Abundance tomato sauce in this book, you would add, but she doesn't say how much olive oil, so that gives you lots of leeway. You would add a very generous amount of olive oil, and then you would add more water when you're pureeing it. So it would probably make more like 2 quarts.
Okay, all right. And so the number of servings would depend on the size of the serving, presumably. So if you were serving it as a starter versus an entree.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. So,
Okay.
I mean, I happen to love, I use this soup in different ways. I use most creamy soups in 2 different ways, either as a little nourishing vegetable side or as sort of the base for my meal. So in particular, if I'm having soup for lunch, I might add a piece of chicken to it, maybe some sauteed greens, you know, maybe my leftover rice from the night before. It was a really flavorful bowl of lunch. Just one more note, I just don't want to forget to mention that this soup should not be made in a shallow baking dish, because it does release a lot of liquid. The tomato has a lot of liquid in it, and it will be releasing a lot of liquid while it cooks. So it will become there'll be a lot left in the pan and a lot sort of created in the pan as it cooks. So you want to use, you know, a roasting pan like this is fine with a nice side, but you don't want to use a shallow pan.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I mean, there's so many things I could say about each of these soups, but I don't want to overwhelm you. And they're all so exciting to me. And this summer in particular, we've been doing in my home a creamy soup intensive because obviously there's an endless amount of soups you can create. You know, not all creamy soups. There's so many soups. But we had COVID pass through in some different forms in our house. And like many of you, I'm sure, have. And we needed a little extra boost of nutrition. And a creamy soup has the effect of feeling a lot like a cooked smoothie. So it's very, very satisfying. Oh my God, I'm running so long, I just realized. Okay, so sorry. So our next soup is a green soup. And I'm actually not going to go into this soup with too much detail because it is in the book, and it repeats a lot of the technique we've already used. So you will saute onion and garlic, and the green soup comes out. You can actually make it all year with different greens, but in the beginning of the season, if that's when you're making it, you might find that you would like to use I forget what it's called, but fresh garlic, the garlic you have to keep in the refrigerator. We get that early in the season. You might want to use scallions and some garlic scapes. So the garlic scapes you really only have the beginning of the season, and they have wonderful nuanced flavor. So this soup, I just have to find the recipe in the book. I make this all the time. I can make this in my sleep, but I haven't followed the recipe in a couple of years. So again, you will saute your onion the same way you did for the previous soup. And then you'll add a few handfuls of arborio rice or any white rice, and salt and pepper. You added the salt with the onion. Oh, did I remember to mention that? You really want to add the salt at that point to extract the flavor and the liquids and caramelize the onions. So you do want to add the salt in the beginning of the sauteing. And then a pound of mixed greens you add on top, and 2.5 cups of water. In this soup, you can pretty much use any green that you like. There are just a few rules. You don't want to use anything with too much flavor. So anything like too bitter that stands out too much. So you could use turnip. Oh, I have these over here. You could use turnip greens, which are wonderful and bitter and come in very small bunches, and they're subtly bitter. And you could use that with Swiss chard, for example, which is a much subtler green. And Swiss chard is available almost the whole season at the farm, and turnip greens are available almost the whole season at the farm. You could use kale, collard greens. You could use a little bit of arugula. Escarole, just a little bit. It's very bitter. This is pretty much a it's wonderful with parsley. My favorite greens to use in this soup is 1 bunch of parsley and 1 bunch of spinach. Happens to be my favorite mix. So the arborio rice will help to make this a creamier soup, so that it's not too thin, and it has, again, that wonderful feel of a wonderful soothing feel. And again, here it clings to the spoon, you see. So we're making it creamy with the arborio rice. The tomato soup didn't need anything because it was just so rich and it had all that extra virgin olive oil. We're using this beautiful purple flour in that soup. And finally, and luckily, since we still have so many recipes to make, we have our winter squash soup. And so far at the farm, we've gotten this beautiful pumpkin. We call it a pie pumpkin, but we only call it a pie pumpkin so that you know that it's edible. It's not a decoration pumpkin. And we have our wonderful delicata squash. So with our squash soup, we follow the same formula that we do for the other 2 pot soups. We start with an onion and garlic layer. And again, maybe at this point, you'll be using your storage onions, the onions you get that can be, that last a very, very long time and don't have to be refrigerated. And you saute your onion, you add some garlic. Again, I would repeat with a little splash of white wine to add that dimension of flavor. Salt, important, pepper, and then your cut up squash. And as a bonus, if you happen to have it in stock, you might like to add an apple peeled or a splash of apple cider, which will, again, add that extra dimension we're looking to build the flavors in our soup. And then I would add, my preference would be spice along the lines of pumpkin pie spice, so very warm autumnal spices. And then again, you cook it for 30 minutes to an hour until the vegetables are tender, and then you puree it. You have this beautiful bright orange soup, which would look beautiful garnished with a dollop of our chimichurri. So we start out the season with a lot of on the farm. When you start out the season, there are very bright, lively greens in the pavilion, and then you have that real abundant time we're in right now, where you have everything: the greens, the winter squash, the zucchini, the tomatoes, and then towards the end of the season, you start getting that feeling that you want to sort of, in the beginning of the season, you want to wake up with the flavors, with the gentle bitters, the lovely greens. And then at the end of the season, you really want to eat warming, nourishing foods. So I'm going to go very quickly through the 2 sauces, because I really don't want to overwhelm all of you. And this has taken longer than I expected. I knew the soups were ambitious, but I really wanted to share with all of you these wonderful recipes. So this chimichurri, what's so fantastic about it, it's a lovely recipe. And what sets chimichurri apart from something like chermoula or another sauce is oregano. So, and also in a chermoula, for example, I always get chimichurri and chermoula confused, but in a chermoula, you would use traditionally cilantro and lemon juice. And in a chimichurri, you use actually traditionally, I've blanked on what it is, parsley and a vinegar, a wine vinegar. And what's interesting also about the chimichurri is you use equal parts vinegar and oil. So it has a much brighter flavor due to that balance of vinegar and fat. So the acid and the fat balance. Normally in a sauce or in a dressing, there's more fat than acid. So it's not usually the same amount. So I'm just going to quickly tell you what's in it. This one, you do not need a blender. You can chop up the vegetables and then mix them in the oil and vinegar. So carrot tops are wonderful because many of us don't know we can eat them, but actually we can. And you can add them to your green soup. You can use them as the green in your pesto. You can use them any way you would use a sauteing green, such as spinach or collard greens or kale. And they really have a very subtle, unoffensive flavor. They almost have no flavor. So this calls for one bunch of carrots, greens, one bunch of carrot greens. She says enough for 1 cup chopped, and actually it's about half a cup, half a bunch of a large bunch of carrots. So it's about half a bunch of greens. 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon of fresh oregano, and there's so much fresh oregano at the farm. And if you can't get fresh oregano, substitute dry oregano. 1 clove of garlic, 1 small red chili pepper, or 1/2 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. They're wonderful red chili peppers at the farm. A 1/4 teaspoon of ground cumin, a teaspoon of paprika, a teaspoon of salt, black pepper to taste, a 1/4 cup of white wine vinegar, and a 1/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil. So this is what our chimichurri looks like. Can you see that? It's really nice because it's chopped and not blended. It has some texture. So when you put it on top of something like salmon, it looks so beautiful because it flecks as opposed to just being a flat creamy sauce. We use this, like I said, this would look beautiful topped on a squash soup. It would be beautiful mixed in with cooked carrots to make a salad. We use it on our sandwiches, on our turkey sandwiches as a layer of flavor. We use it to dip our bread with our hummus. Pretty much we use it for everything. I would mix it in with a little pasta, have it with avocado toast. There's really no end. Add it to a little bit of salad dressing, or mix it with your cooked beans or your quinoa to make a salad. Are there any questions? I'm sorry, Tara, I forgot to ask.
No problem. Yeah, we did have one question. When you were mentioning the green soup, the question is, when do you add the greens?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I flew through that because I was getting nervous about time. But so, it doesn't really matter that much. There are no rules to a soup like this, but you always add the onions first. So the onion garlic layer, you always add first. And you let it cook a bit and you add the salt because you really want to draw out all those juices, all the sugar and all the flavor from that layer. That's such an important layer in any soup. So you always start with that and you let it cook till it's just at least a bit translucent and it smells really good. So that's sort of your cue when you start to smell like, oh, I'm making something delicious. That's about when you can start adding the other ingredients. And at that point, you can add the greens. And you wash your greens. That's something I do like to go over, but I don't want to go too too late. You wash your greens really, really well, and then you cut them up rough, sort of rough cut, and you add them at that point. And then you also add your rice. And the arborio rice would be my first choice. It just makes a really nice texture, but any white rice is great.
Thank you. And just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And while we're waiting, I do have a quick question for you. I'm curious to know, is it possible, especially with bitter greens, can you cook the bitter out of them?
Yes. Do you guys want the pesto recipe? Should I do that really quick?
Oh, sure. Yes, please.
Let me do the pesto, and then let's talk about greens just a little bit, okay? Because I want to show you my collection of greens, and then we can talk about that, okay? So once upon a time, pesto was very traditional, and it was basil and pine nuts and Parmesan cheese and olive oil and garlic. But the rules certainly have changed, and now pesto can be absolutely anything you want. And this particular pesto that I made recently is parsley and garlic and walnuts, lemon juice, and extra virgin olive oil. It's a very simple recipe. And I use parsley. I like parsley, but it happened to be a Monday night and my share is on Tuesday, and that's all I had in the house. So pesto, like the chimichurri, can be used on absolutely anything. It can be a spread on your sandwich. It can be, you can fill your ravioli with it if you want a gourmet dish. You can cook your fish and top it with the pesto. You can have it as a snack on your rice cake. You can dip your vegetables into it. It's very, very versatile, super healthy, and really fun to have around. So I'm just going to tell you real quick I'm not going to go over at length what you can put in your pesto, but again, anything is fair game. Elana made a pesto with turnip greens and hazelnut. The hazelnut balanced out the bitter of the turnip greens. They're a little sweet. Sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, almonds, pistachio nuts, anything. Pecans are good in a pesto. So there are no rules, and you can use it in all sorts of ways. So
yeah, I've also made it with arugula.
That's one of my favorites. I love that. Yep, arugula, parsley, which we have here, Swiss chard, 3 bunches of greens. You wash, chop, stems removed. 2 cloves of garlic, 2/3 cup of extra virgin olive oil, 1.5 cup of walnuts, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. I know that was quick. It's in the book. It's a solid recipe. You can plug anything into the formula. You put your nuts in first, or your seeds, your garlic, your lemon juice. Lemon juice is not traditional in a pesto, but again, I really like that gentle acidity to balance out the fat in a dish. Your extra virgin olive oil, and then herbs to the top of your food processor. And often you can't fit herbs and greens in your food processor. If you can't fit them all, you process it a couple times and then add the greens once it's shrunk. Okay. So that's that recipe that I flew through, but I said I was going to give it to you, so I wanted to make sure I did. And then I want to answer Tara's question about greens. There are some greens that are really gentle and not bitter at all, like the kale, the collards, and the Swiss chard. Then you have greens like mustard greens, escarole a bit. We had broccoli rabe at the farm this year. Radish greens, and they can be really bitter. So there are a few things I recommend. Saute your greens. Sauteing your greens is a wonderful way. Again, you're going to use that little bit of salt, that little bit of oil, and you're going to really draw out different flavors from the greens, and you're going to make them a little bit more tender. So I do recommend that you saute the greens similar to how you prepare your onion for the soups. You get your pan, your saute pan nice and warm. You add your olive oil and do add 2 tablespoons of olive oil. That fat will actually help to balance the bitter. Make sure that you do add salt. If the green is these are very tender, the turnip greens, but sometimes a mustard green, broccoli rabe. Sometimes our broccoli rabe at the farm this year was actually quite tender, but sometimes a green is a little bit rough and hard. It's hard to get it to cook and be just the right palatable texture. So in that case, you can also add a little bit of water, broth, or white wine. So you're adding a steaming element to the green. And you add your green, you have your salt, your pepper, and you put the lid on and you want to cook it till it's tender. Cooking your greens till they're tender will also help offset the bitterness. So the oil, the salt, cooking them the right amount, adding water when you need to, if they need to be steamed a bit, helps. It's a little actually hard for me to answer because I love bitter greens. So the more bitter, the more I love them. But does that answer your question, Tara?
It does, thank you. And we have one more. Oh, sorry.
You can also add a sweeter element to the green. So I often will add a bunch of parsley chopped up to a green that's a little bit intense. And the parsley cooks out somewhat sweet, or you could add a little spinach or a little scallion. The sweet of the onion can also balance it. Okay.
Oh, great tip. Thank you. We did get one more question. Any cheese in the pesto?
No, I don't put cheese in the pesto.
Okay. Can you, if you prefer it that way, or like Parmesan, or?
Yeah, I mean, what we tend to do in my house is, depending on our preference in that particular day, we add cheese to the pasta. So if we're having it with pasta, we might then add Parmesan cheese. You absolutely can add cheese.
Great, thank you. All right, so we don't have any more questions at this time. So, Elana, should I hand it over to you?
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to share the slide as soon as I can do that. Okay. And just leave this here a sec so that you can get all the info about how to get the book. As I said earlier, we'd love you to come visit Stearns Farm on Tuesdays and Fridays when we're open. We'll be open. Our summer share season goes through the end of October, and then we open again in May for our seedling sale, and then in June for the summer share. You can order the book online for a week, and if you want to learn more about the farm and our shares, visit our website, stearnsfarmcsa.org. We are opening sales of summer shares to the public on November 1st. Before November 1st, we have an early bird special for our current sharers. They get first dibs, but we usually have plenty of shares available for sale to the public. And, we really love welcoming new members to the farm. And then we're on social media, Facebook and Instagram, if you want to check us out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. We did get one more question. Can you recommend a place to buy artisanal bread? Because presumably you'd want to have something very good to go with those soups.
I mean, I am a bread snob. So, I mean, if you want to travel, there's Iggy's Bread in Cambridge, and there's Clear Flour in Brookline. But, Trader Joe's has amazing artisanal bread, actually. They have bread from the bakery in Pandavignon? The one in Hyannis. It's really good. And they have some San Francisco sourdough breads. And Whole Foods has really good artisanal bread. They get bread from Iggy's Bakery. And Iggy's Bakery, I would say, is the best the best around.
And I'll give a plug for Birch Tree Breads. They are based in Worcester, but every week they're at the Natick Farmers Market on Saturday morning. And, and that's where I usually get my bread.
Great. And I'll put in a plug too. The Framingham Whole Foods has started carrying 7 Stars Bakery bread. And if you're not familiar with this bakery, it's a small local chain in Providence. And I can tell you that the bread is very good.
It's just funny. It used to be really hard to find. Like, I worked in high school, which was a really, really long time ago. I worked at a cafe, and they got clear flour bread. And just like Stearns Farm was the first CSA, clear flour bread was the only bakery like that around. And now there's a lot of good bread you can find.
That's true. All right. Well, everyone, it was just a real pleasure having you, Elana and Daphne, with us tonight. What you shared was just wonderful. And I hope everyone who's still here has an opportunity to either check out this cookbook or buy yourself a copy. I know that I will be giving this as a gift soon enough this holiday season. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
thank you all again.
Thank you, Tara. It was a lot of
Thank
fun.
you, Tara, and thank you everyone for joining. It's been really great to share this with you.
It really has. I hope we have you again. I hope you'll have another cookbook. And we'll have you again.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.